In a world where the color of one's skin often dictated their path, Charley Pride carved out a trail entirely his own. He didn't simply arrive in country music, he transformed it. A baritone that rang with warmth, songs that bridged cultural divides, and a charisma that was humble yet unshakable, Pride became one of the most beloved and unlikely stars of his generation. For decades, his voice echoed through radios and concert halls, becoming a familiar presence in households across America. But while the world saw the smooth smile and rich melodies, there was another story unfolding quietly behind the scenes, one of deep roots, quiet dreams, and a life lived with both joy and sorrow. Charley Pride's journey from a sharecropper son in Mississippi to the second best-selling artist on RCA Records, trailing only Elvis Presley, was not just improbable, it was historic. He was the first black superstar of country music, a man who refused to be boxed in by the rigid expectations of his time. In 1971, the Country Music Association named him Entertainer of the Year, solidifying a legacy that had already begun reshaping the landscape of American music. His hits, Kiss an Angel Good Morning, Just Between You and Me, and I'm Just Me were not merely chart toppers, they were declarations of talent that transcended barriers. With success came not just accolades, but a lifestyle few could imagine. Charley and his wife Rosine settled into a sprawling French Norman-style mansion in Dallas, Texas, a home filled with charm, grandeur, and the quiet pride of a life well-earned. Yet, far away from the elegance of Dallas, tucked away in his Mississippi hometown, stood another home. It was modest in comparison, but perhaps more telling of the man behind the music. This was the place where Charley had hoped to retire, surrounded by memories and the landscape of his youth. But following his untimely passing in 2020, that home remains eerily empty, abandoned, its silence now louder than any melody. This is the story of Charley Pride, not just the country icon, but the man, the boy who dreamed beyond cotton fields, the athlete who chased fastballs before chasing fame, the artist whose music soothed millions, even as personal storms sometimes gathered in the distance. From his staggering rise in country music to the mysteries left behind in the quiet corners of his life, we invite you to rediscover the man whose legacy still lingers in every note and every silence. But to understand how Charley Pride built such a legacy, we must first journey back to where it all began. In a small Mississippi town where music, like opportunity, was hard-won and rarely promised. Charley Pride was born on March 18, 1934, in the tiny town of Sledge, Mississippi, deep in the heart of the Jim Crow South. He was the fourth of 11 children in a family of sharecroppers, where days began early, laboring under the sweltering sun, and ended with little more than aching backs and tired prayers. There was no glamour, no stage lights, only cotton fields and a hope that maybe, someday, life would offer more. His father, Mac Pride Sr., worked the land with stoic determination, and his mother, Tessie B. Stewart Pride, anchored the household with love and quiet resilience. Together, they instilled in their children the values of hard work, humility, and faith. Though money was scarce, music was abundant in the Pride household. Gospel hymns filled the air on Sundays, and the local radio offered an escape from the grueling routines of rural life. At the age of 14, Charley's mother bought him his first guitar from Sears, a simple gesture, but one that altered the course of his life. He taught himself to play by ear, strumming chords with fingers still calloused from fieldwork. That guitar became both an instrument and a companion, offering comfort during long, difficult days. Even as music began to whisper its call, Charley's first love was baseball. Like many boys in the segregated South, he idolized the players of the Negro Leagues. He practiced for hours on end, believing that if he could throw fast enough, hit hard enough, maybe, just maybe, he could make it out. Sports offered what the South often denied: meritocracy, where skill could outshine skin color, even if only briefly. Education, like everything else, was a challenge. Charley attended segregated schools, where resources were few and expectations often lower. But even then, his quiet confidence stood out. Teachers remembered him as kind and focused. Classmates, though mostly poor like him, admired his natural charisma. Pride knew he was different, not just in talent, but in drive. There was something in him that would not settle for the lot handed to him at birth. By his late teens, it was clear Charley would have to choose between the two forces tugging at him: baseball and music. Both required sacrifice, and both offered a path out of poverty. What he couldn't yet know was that he would chase one and be pursued by the other, until destiny brought them together on a winding road through stadiums, army barracks, and smoky bars. And so, with a glove in one hand and a guitar never far from reach, young Charley Pride stepped into the wider world, carrying with him the grit of Mississippi soil and the sound of something more. His next chapter would take him to the ball fields of the Negro Leagues and, eventually, to an unlikely uniform that would shape both his discipline and his direction. By the time Charley Pride reached adulthood, the crack of a baseball bat had become as familiar to him as the strum of a guitar. In 1952, at the age of 18, he signed on with the Memphis Red Sox, a team in the storied Negro American League. It was a dream realized, playing professional ball, traveling to new cities, and stepping onto fields that seemed worlds away from the cotton rows of Mississippi. The crowds were modest, the pay was meager, but for Pride, the experience was golden. He wasn't just playing a game, he was claiming space in a world that so often shut the door on men who looked like him. Charley's pitching arm became his passport. He moved from team to team, Boise Yankees, Louisville Clippers, Birmingham Black Barons, chasing the promise of a breakthrough. Each roster change carried with it the same mix of hope and uncertainty. Some seasons were stronger than others. Sometimes he was traded not for another player, but for a used team bus or a few $100s. But still he played. And all the while, music followed him like a shadow, on bus rides, in locker rooms, in the quiet moments between games. Then, in 1956, life took another turn. Pride was drafted into the United States Army and stationed at Fort Carson in Colorado. For many young men, military service was a detour. For Charley, it was a kind of sharpening stone. The Army taught him discipline, structure, and perseverance, qualities he already possessed in abundance but would soon need in even greater measure. While there, he continued to play baseball for the base team and began singing at social gatherings and informal shows, where his voice often garnered more attention than his fastball. Upon completing his service, he returned briefly to professional baseball, rejoining the Memphis Red Sox. But something had shifted. His body ached more, his pitches had lost some of their edge, and the music, always a quiet companion, was growing louder. He began performing in local bars and clubs, first in Colorado, then in Montana, where he settled with his wife Rosine. It was there, in Helena, that his life would change forever. Playing semi-pro ball for the East Helena Smelterites and singing on the side, Pride started gaining a following, not as an athlete, but as a performer. His voice, smooth and resonant, carried an emotional depth that made people pause mid-conversation. One night, a demo recording found its way into the hands of legendary RCA producer Chet Atkins. The response was swift and clear. This man had something special. And just like that, the balance shifted. The boy who once dreamed of the major leagues now found himself standing on the edge of an entirely different stage. His days of bus rides and broken-in gloves were giving way to microphone stands and studio lights. Ahead lay Nashville, uncertain and unforgiving, but also full of promise. Charley Pride was about to become something the country music world had never seen before. When Charley Pride arrived in Nashville in the early 1960s, the odds were stacked firmly against him. Country music had long been dominated by white performers, and black artists were often excluded from its most visible stages. Yet, with a voice that felt like home and a quiet determination forged in fields and dugouts, Pride didn't walk into the genre asking for permission. He walked in with purpose. His earliest recordings, including The Snakes Crawl at Night, were released without fanfare. In fact, RCA initially avoided putting his photo on the album covers, fearing that Southern radio stations might refuse to play music by a black man. But Pride's voice had a way of bypassing prejudice. It wasn't loud or flashy, it was sincere, full of warmth and depth, and unmistakably country. That voice did what no marketing campaign could. It built trust. The turning point came in 1967 with the release of Just Between You and Me. The song, simple in structure but rich in feeling, became a breakthrough hit. It climbed the charts, earned Charley his first Grammy nomination, and led to a major concert at Detroit's Olympia Stadium. More importantly, it opened the doors of the Grand Ole Opry. That same year, he became the first black artist to perform there since DeFord Bailey in 1941. It was a quiet revolution, no banners, no speeches, just a man with a guitar stepping into a space that had never fully welcomed someone like him. As his music reached new ears, it did something remarkable. It connected. All I have to offer you is me. I'm just me. And I can't believe that you've stopped loving me became fixtures on the airwaves. Each track felt both familiar and fresh, rooted in classic country storytelling, but carried by a voice that stood apart. The themes were universal: heartache, longing, resilience, and Pride delivered them with a sincerity that was impossible to ignore. By 1971, his place among the greats was undeniable. That year, the Country Music Association awarded him its highest honor, Entertainer of the Year. It was not just a recognition of his musical achievements, but a signal to the industry and the world that change was not only possible, it was already here. Pride didn't ask country music to redefine itself. He simply showed it what it could become. Behind the scenes, he remained humble. He rarely spoke about race unless asked, choosing instead to let his work speak for itself. But his presence on stage was powerful. It told every black child with a guitar, every unheard voice, that there was room for them too. Charley Pride was not a protester in the traditional sense. He was a pioneer, quiet, steady, and unstoppable. And with success finally within reach, Pride set his sights even higher. The 1970s would see him reach new heights of fame and influence, not only in the United States, but across oceans and into hearts that had never heard his name before. By the early 1970s, Charley Pride had become more than a chart-topping singer. He was a cultural phenomenon. What had begun with quiet radio play and hesitant industry acceptance had blossomed into something truly extraordinary. His 1971 hit Kiss and Angel Good Morning wasn't just a commercial success. It was a defining anthem of a generation. The song spent weeks atop the country charts and even crossed over into the Billboard Hot 100, a rare feat for a country track, rarer still for one performed by a black artist. But for Pride, success never seemed to rest on spectacle. His songs resonated not because they were loud, but because they were honest. The momentum carried through the decade, as Charley continued to produce hit after hit. Songs like Mississippi Cotton Picking Delta Town, Burgers and Fries, and I'd Rather Love You revealed not only his vocal range, but his storytelling grace. Each song felt like a conversation, personal, grounded, and full of feeling. His music wasn't just enjoyed, it was trusted. It comforted listeners through heartbreak, long drives, and quiet Sunday mornings. Though Pride was undeniably a superstar, he never let fame consume him. He remained approachable, kind, and deeply committed to his fans. His live performances reflected that same spirit, warm, engaging, and often laced with a touch of humor. At concerts, he would shake hands, sign autographs, and thank his audience with genuine gratitude. His success had not dulled the humility etched into him from childhood. If anything, it had only deepened his appreciation for the journey. His fame wasn't confined to American borders. In 1975, Pride embarked on a tour of the United Kingdom, where his music found an unexpectedly devoted audience. It was there that Crystal Chandeliers, a song that had never charted high in the United States, took on a life of its own. In Northern Ireland, during a time of bitter political and religious conflict known as the Troubles, the song became a beloved anthem, played in both Protestant and Catholic communities, symbolizing rare common ground. That kind of unity, sparked not by politics, but by music, was a testament to Pride's quiet power as an artist. In 1980, he was invited to perform the national anthem at the World Series, an honor that placed him before millions of viewers. It was the most watched game in the event's history, and Charley's voice, steady and proud, rang through every corner of the stadium. He returned again in 2010, a nod to the longevity of his place in American culture. These moments weren't just ceremonial. They were reminders of how far he had come and how deeply he had embedded himself into the nation's story. By the time he appeared in the 2016 Forever Country mashup, celebrating 50 years of country music, Pride had become more than a pioneer. He was an institution. And when he released Music in My Heart in 2017, his first album in 6 years, it wasn't to chase a trend or reclaim glory. It was simply because the music still lived within him. Yet even as he stood at the pinnacle of success, Charley Pride remained drawn to places of stillness. Fame had brought him around the world, but the notion of home, of peace, simplicity, and permanence never left him. And so, with Rosine by his side, he built a retreat in Dallas, one that reflected not the glitz of the stage, but the warmth of family life. As Charley Pride's music soared to global heights, his home life settled into a quieter rhythm, one shaped not by spotlight, but by sanctuary. In the heart of Dallas, Texas, he and his wife Rosine found a haven that offered both beauty and peace. Their residence, a 6,200 square foot French Norman-style estate, stood as a symbol of their journey, elegant yet grounded, luxurious yet lived in. Designed by renowned architect Charles Dilbeck, the home was more than a house. It was a personal landmark, thoughtfully built for family, comfort, and reflection. The estate's architecture was distinctive, its stone exterior and classic lines evoking the charm of old European countryside manners. Inside, cathedral ceilings stretched high above exposed wooden beams, casting a warm, expansive feel throughout the home. Fireplaces anchored nearly every major room, not merely as decoration, but as gathering places where friends, children, and grandchildren could sit, talk, and laugh as music drifted softly in the background. The stained glass windows added a gentle kaleidoscope of light to each room, turning ordinary days into something quietly magical. Outside, the 1.6-acre property unfolded like a dream. Lush gardens surrounded the home, carefully tended yet relaxed, giving way to hidden corners of greenery and serene pathways. A koi pond shimmered near the edge of the grounds, and a cathedral-style cabana, complete with its own fireplace, offered an intimate outdoor retreat. The estate's pool glistened under the Texas sun, and nearby, a modest baseball field paid homage to the first dream Pride ever chased. Every detail told a story. Every stone, every beam, whispered of a man who had walked far from where he began, and yet never strayed too far from what mattered. But while the Dallas estate became a place of cherished memories, another home remained waiting. In his hometown of Sledge, Mississippi, Charley Pride had purchased a mid-century modern house set atop a quiet hill. He had plans to return there one day, to remodel it, retire in it, and spend his final years where it had all begun. The house, open and airy with sweeping views and a sparkling diving pool, had been carefully chosen for its tranquility and potential. It was not grand in the way of Dallas, but it was meaningful. Then came the pandemic. As COVID-19 swept across the world, plans were paused, dreams deferred. In December 2020, Charley Pride passed away due to complications from the virus. The Mississippi house, once imagined as a closing chapter, was left untouched, its doors unopened, its promise unrealized. Since then, it has remained vacant, quietly listed for sale, a home filled with echoes of a life that had intended to return, but never did. And while the estate in Dallas remained a symbol of all Charley had built, the abandoned home in Mississippi stood as a poignant reminder that even the most carefully drawn plans can be rewritten by fate. Yet in both places, one could still feel his presence, in the beams and windows, in the garden paths, and in the dreams that lingered quietly beneath the silence. Still, for Charley Pride, legacy was never confined to real estate. His impact stretched far beyond brick and timber. Through his success, he had gathered not just wealth, but purpose. And with it, he gave back to his community, to young dreamers, and to those who might never meet him, but would still feel his hand reaching out. Long before the word philanthropist was ever attached to his name, Charley Pride understood what it meant to give. Raised in a place where kindness was often all that could be spared, he carried those early lessons with him into every chapter of his success. As his fame grew, so too did his desire to offer opportunity to those who needed it most. For Pride, giving back wasn't an obligation, it was a calling. At the heart of his charitable work stood the Charley Pride Foundation, an organization established to reflect his personal values and experiences. Its mission focused on supporting underprivileged youth, especially those in rural communities like the one he came from. Pride had lived the reality of small-town struggle, where talent often bloomed in silence and where dreams could be easily lost for lack of guidance or resources. Through scholarships and educational initiatives, the foundation aimed to change that. Education, to Pride, was more than academics. It was freedom, the ability to imagine a future beyond what was visible. His foundation quietly funded programs that helped students continue their studies, pursue their goals, and believe in their potential. Many of the recipients came from backgrounds not unlike his own, children of laborers, dreamers in dusty towns, and for them, Pride's support was not just financial, but symbolic. It said, "I see you. I was you." Equally dear to him was music education. As someone who taught himself guitar on a Sears instrument, he knew what it meant to nurture talent with limited tools. Pride believed deeply in the transformative power of the arts, especially for young people. He sponsored programs that placed instruments in schools, supported music teachers, and encouraged performance opportunities. In doing so, he opened doors for countless children to find confidence, creativity, and their own voice. His compassion extended beyond classrooms and concert halls. As a veteran of the United States Army, Charley Pride remained deeply connected to those who served. He understood the discipline, the sacrifice, and often, the invisible wounds left behind. Throughout his life, he performed at military events, raised funds for veterans programs, and advocated for better treatment and services. Whether singing the national anthem at the World Series or quietly donating to a hospital wing, his reverence for those in uniform never waned. Pride also lent his talents to a variety of charity concerts and relief efforts. From disaster aid to local community support, his presence brought more than star power. It brought attention, funding, and inspiration. He never sought headlines for these efforts. He believed that the best giving was quiet, steady, and deeply personal. What made Charley Pride's philanthropy so meaningful was not its scale, but its sincerity. He didn't give because it was expected. He gave because he remembered. He remembered what it felt like to need help. He remembered the teachers, coaches, and neighbors who once believed in him. And above all, he remembered the quiet strength of his mother, who once saved enough to buy him a guitar that changed everything. Though the stages would one day fall silent and the applause would fade into memory, Charley Pride's generosity continued to speak through the lives he touched and the futures he helped shape. But behind every public gesture was a private man with his own family story, one not without complexity or pain. And as the world celebrated his triumphs, his personal life unfolded with its own quiet trials. Behind Charley Pride's composed demeanor and golden baritone was a man whose personal life, like so many others, held both profound devotion and quiet strain. His marriage to Rosine Corin, whom he affectionately called Rosine, was a cornerstone of his stability. The two had met in the mid-1950s in Memphis while Pride was still playing baseball. Their bond formed quickly, and in 1956, during a short leave from Army basic training, they were married. What began as a modest union would become a lifelong partnership, weathering decades of fame, travel, and the inevitable pressures that come with public life. Together, they raised 3 children, 2 sons, Craig and Dion, and a daughter, Angela. As the years passed, the Pride family grew to include 5 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. For all the bright lights and stage appearances, Charley always returned to his role as a father and grandfather with quiet pride. Holidays were spent with laughter and home-cooked meals. Stories were shared on front porches and back patios, not red carpets. Fame may have shaped his days, but family shaped his heart. Yet, like many families, theirs was not without complexity. In the late 1970s, during a period of intense touring and national recognition, Pride engaged in a brief relationship with a flight attendant in Dallas. That encounter, though fleeting, had lasting consequences. In 1979, the woman gave birth to a son, Tyler, and for years the matter remained private, unspoken in public and barely acknowledged in the press. It was a quiet fracture in an otherwise carefully preserved image. In 1990, the situation came into legal focus when Tyler's mother filed a paternity lawsuit seeking child support. Pride contested the claim, and it wasn't until 1992 that a court-ordered DNA test confirmed what had long been suspected. Tyler was indeed Charley's biological son. The court required Pride to pay child support until Tyler reached adulthood, and the boy's last name was legally changed to Pride. The revelation, though handled discreetly, introduced a new and delicate thread into the family fabric. While Rosine and the rest of the Pride family acknowledged Tyler's existence, the relationship between him and his father remained largely private. There were gestures of recognition, but little was shared publicly. Pride, never one to speak on personal matters, chose to protect the sanctity of his family life with the same care he brought to his music. Understated, respectful, and often shielded from public scrutiny. Despite the strain it may have caused, the Pride family endured. Rosine remained at Charley's side until the very end, their bond tempered by time and trials. Their children continued to support their father's legacy, often participating in events, interviews, and tributes. And while the story of Tyler Pride lingered quietly in the background, it would come back to the forefront in the years following Charley's passing, reigniting questions of legacy, recognition, and the responsibilities that outlive us all. As the sun began to set on Charley Pride's remarkable life, those closest to him gathered around with both pride and pain. The man who had broken barriers on stage had also wrestled with personal reckonings behind closed doors. And yet through it all, he remained deeply human, loving, flawed, and steadfast in his commitment to those he called family. But time, as always, moved forward. And in the twilight of his life, another challenge emerged, one not of music or family, but of health. As Charley Pride entered the final chapter of his life, the spotlight never truly faded. Though his appearances became less frequent and his recording schedule slowed, his presence remained deeply felt within the country music community. He still performed on occasion, still greeted fans with that same warm smile, and still sang with the quiet power that had carried him across decades. Yet behind the scenes, time was leaving its mark. In 1997, Pride was diagnosed with a tumor on his right vocal cord, a deeply personal challenge for a man whose voice had built an entire legacy. The diagnosis was serious, casting a shadow over his ability to continue performing. But as he had done many times before, he met adversity with determination. The tumor was successfully removed at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, and in the years that followed, he resumed performing, albeit more selectively. His voice, though changed, still carried the soul of a storyteller. Despite the health scare, Charley's later years were not marked by retreat. In 2010, he returned to sing the national anthem at the World Series once more, his voice rising with pride before a sea of spectators. In 2016, he stood among fellow country legends in the Forever Country project, a tribute to the genre's enduring spirit. And in 2017, he released Music in My Heart, his final studio album, a testament to his unwavering love for the craft that had defined his life. But in December 2020, the world received the news that Charley Pride had passed away due to complications related to COVID-19. He was 86 years old. His passing marked the end of an era in which he had stood as a singular figure, defying conventions and leaving behind a legacy few could rival. Tributes poured in from across the world. Artists, fans, and fellow performers reflected on his impact, his kindness, and the doors he had opened for so many. Yet, in the months that followed, his family life once again made headlines. In May 2021, Tyler Pride, the son born from Charley's affair decades earlier, filed a legal challenge to contest his father's will. Tyler claimed that he had been deliberately excluded from the estate in order to preserve a carefully crafted public image. He described the omission not as a legal oversight, but as a calculated decision to maintain silence around his existence. It was a painful echo of past tensions, now brought back into the public eye. Rosine Pride, Charley's widow and the executor of his estate, responded through a statement to the Dallas Morning News. She acknowledged Tyler's paternity, affirming that Charley had supported him during his life. But she maintained that Tyler had been compensated appropriately and suggested the lawsuit was more a financial maneuver than a quest for recognition. The legal dispute was quietly resolved in September 2022, its terms undisclosed. Though settled in court, the matter reopened conversations about legacy, not just what is left behind, but who is included in that memory. The conflict, though difficult, revealed the complexity of Pride's life beyond the stage. It was a reminder that even men who seem larger than life are still shaped by the quiet, unresolved chapters they leave behind. And yet, through every triumph and trial, Charley Pride's story remained one of extraordinary resilience. His music, his generosity, and his quiet courage defined his legacy far more than any headline could. As the world looked back on his life, it became clear that the story of Charley Pride was more than one of success. It was a portrait of dignity in the face of challenge and grace in the midst of contradiction. Still, beyond the newspaper clippings and courtroom filings, what endured most was the music and the memory of a man who had walked through fire and sung his way into the hearts of millions. In the end, Charley Pride left behind far more than melodies and memories. He left behind a legacy woven into the very fabric of American music. His voice, rich and steady, did more than entertain. It healed, bridged, and inspired. With every note he sang, he chipped away at barriers that had stood for generations. And he did so not with bitterness, but with grace. He didn't demand entry into country music. He earned it, one song, one show, one small victory at a time. From the cotton fields of Sledge to the polished stages of the Grand Ole Opry, Pride's life was marked by contrasts, poverty and success, isolation and acclaim, silence and song. He bore the weight of history quietly, knowing that his very presence in a genre that had long excluded people who looked like him was, in itself, a form of quiet resistance. But, to Charley, it was never about resistance. It was about doing what he loved, with humility and heart. He once said, "I was just singing songs I loved to sing. If people could accept me, I figured the rest would take care of itself." And it did. Not without hardship, not without sacrifice, but with enduring impact. For every child who doubted their place, for every artist who wondered if there was room for someone like them, Charley Pride's story became a guiding light. He didn't just change country music, he changed the people who listened to it. Even now, years after his passing, his influence ripples outward. His songs still play on quiet drives and dusty radios. His name still echoes in award shows, in country halls of fame, in the voices of those who followed him through doors he opened. His homes, both the mansion that still stands and the one left waiting, speak to dreams realized and dreams deferred, to the fullness and fragility of a life lived in motion. Charley Pride was not perfect, but he was profoundly human. He was a trailblazer, a family man, a giver, and at times, a man caught between what the world expected and what life delivered. In his music, we hear more than stories. We hear the soul of a man who bore joy and sorrow with the same quiet dignity. And in that, his legacy remains not just untouchable, but unforgettable. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of Hollywood's golden era.